Urban planning has created many positive outcomes that we often take for granted today. Public transportation, an extensive highway system, public parks and green spaces. However, some practices can have negative and severe impacts on certain populations. Displaced neighborhoods, traffic congestion, and the loss of affordable housing and increased homelessness. These negative aspects are often referred to as the dark side of planning. They have contributed to social, economic, and racial injustices. Welcome to City Vision. Please join us as we take our peek into planning and look at the dark side of urban planning. I'm Trajan Jones, Planning and Zoning Official for the Borough of Indiana, Pennsylvania. And in this episode, we'll talk about some of the negative effects of urban planning and how these movements influence city planning today. Redlining targets certain parts of a city as being bad for investment. These areas were based on racial and ethnic makeup of the population. On the map, these areas were literally outlined in red. Banks would often refuse to provide loans or mortgages, or they charged higher rates for them. Insurance was more expensive or may not have even been available at all. As a result of these discriminatory practices, neighborhoods were deprived of needed resources. Early public housing projects were often divided by race, even after desegregation was mandated. The legacy and impact of redlining remained. Redlining limited the resources available to minority communities. Banks and companies would not invest in these areas, jobs disappeared, and poverty levels increased. African American neighborhoods were hit the hardest. They lacked access to quality services and opportunities for development. The results were negative, long-term effects on that community. Now, in contrast, predominantly white neighborhoods had access to wealth and resources, so they escaped the devastating impacts of redlining. In the mid-20th century, many cities began urban renewal projects, and the goal of this was to bring new life to areas that were falling into disrepair. New commercial areas, better housing, and more green spaces. These types of projects often require large-scale demolition of existing neighborhoods for redevelopment to begin occurring. Urban renewal projects greatly impacted low-income and minority communities. The projects sought to improve areas, but the result was gentrification. New, upscale neighborhoods with greater economic benefits and services came at the cost of current residents as they saw their communities destroyed. As the cost of living soared, lower-income residents were displaced, and they could not find affordable housing. Their sense of community identity and heritage was lost, and their social support networks were broken. Examples of this gentrification and loss of neighborhoods were seen in many areas. In Pennsylvania, examples include the Lower Hill District in Pittsburgh and University City in Philadelphia. Think about the commonly used services in your city. It could be roads, public transportation, schools, even water and power lines. This is the infrastructure, basic services used by all residents. However, infrastructure development has favored wealthy areas over poorer ones. The differences in the quality of roads, public transportation, schools, and recreational facilities are night and day. Even when infrastructure is developed, sometimes it can do more harm than good. New highways can divide neighborhoods, and new schools can move students out of their local school districts. And it's the low-income neighborhoods that experience these effects the most. Building new infrastructure takes up space. Homes, parks, and neighborhoods can be destroyed. Residents are displaced and must move elsewhere. But development can do more than displace residents. It can create physical barriers that divide neighborhoods. Highways and commuter rail lines become physical barriers that split communities. This can then segregate areas as seen in the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota. The barriers created can also reduce access to essential services that are now on the other side of the freeway or commuter line. This separation even reduces economic opportunity for those left behind. It can be difficult to confront the dark side of urban planning, but it's necessary to avoid repeating past mistakes. Prioritization of inclusive planning practices is a relatively recent phenomenon in urban planning. Planners are now focused on empowering residents to have more of a say in the planning processes and utilizing opportunities to fix past mistakes. Examples of prioritizing inclusive planning practices includes projects such as the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Grant and the engagement of community members protesting the development of a new sports arena in Philadelphia's Chinatown neighborhood. When social, economic, and racial biases influence planning, injustices will occur. To counter these biases, equity, inclusion, and community engagement are essential. After all, if you're going to develop a community, it's important to hear the voices of that community to be sure that you're on the right track. Thanks for watching. I'm Trajan Jones, and this is City Vision.